My name is Meghan Fredel, and my office is located at the Wisconsin Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired, which is located in Janesville. And we, for short, call that the WCBVI. And the WCBVI is under the umbrella of the Department of Public Instruction, which we will refer to as the DPI for short. So I work with Trisha, who you've probably met several times. She coordinates this annual conference and just does such a wonderful job. The WCBVI has two arms. We like to say there's the residential arm and then there's the outreach arm. Trisha and I are part of the outreach arm of the team, and we are a team of 14. We are available to residential students, but our mission is to reach out to all families and children, to public schools, agencies, and teams who work with your children. So we're really available to any child in Wisconsin who is blind and visually impaired and has an IEP. All right, so the first thing that I would like to address today is a question we hear pretty frequently. So as parents and teachers, you might have had experience with physical therapy, also known as PT, or maybe occupational therapy and physical education, OT, PE. All these initials can be a little confusing. And today I will be focused on orientation and mobility, also known as O&M. And O&M is a specialized service for children who are blind and visually impaired. Your child might also receive PT or OT and even have a PE teacher in their school-aged years. And all of these professionals are very important to address strength and coordination and to learning about using the body more efficiently. So we want to start off with a frequently asked question. What is the difference between physical therapy and orientation and mobility? And according to Brenda B. Gregory of the Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, the physical therapist primarily supports gross motor issues of balance, walking, accessing doors, stairs, curbs, posture, wheelchair transfer, and other wheelchair issues, leg bracing, and accompanying issues. The O&M, however, is specially trained in instructing safe and independent travel to individuals who are blind or visually impaired. And so I personally have this training, and I'm called an orientation and mobility specialist. There are a couple other terms that you might hear when someone is referring to an orientation and mobility specialist. You might hear of them being called a COMS, which is COMS. That stands for a certified orientation and mobility specialist, and that is someone who is certified nationally by ACVREP, which is a national organization. You might hear of someone being called an NOMC, and an NOMC is an O&M who has been certified through another national professional organization, which is very cool that we have two certifying bodies. You might also hear the term orientation and mobility teacher. You might hear mobility teacher. You might hear just O&M. You might hear the term cane lady. And one of my personal favorites from a past student of mine, who they would introduce me as Ms. Fredel, the person who walks around with me, and I have to show her places in my school. So you might hear a lot of different terms referring to the same professional. And again, this profession is specific to working with people who are blind or visually impaired. And it even goes back to, its beginnings go back pretty far with World War II veterans who came back from the war and were blinded due to their injuries. A couple other terms that you may hear, especially as your child enters school, is a teacher of the blind and visually impaired, or a TVI. And that person is that teacher is going to support your child likely in class. They might prepare materials such as large print, braille. They might prepare tactile drawings or models. They support with assistive technology and other tools that are going to support your student accessing their education, such as a CCTV or a braille note. And your O&M is going to support you or support your child in the classroom, but also out of the classroom. That could be on the playground, in neighborhoods, in the community. And some of the tools that they might use with their child are the white cane, tactile maps, a GPS, different GPS technology, apps on a cell phone, and binoculars, just to name a few. One of the really important things, so now that we have this background information, is to keep in mind that orientation and mobility is really answering these two questions. So an individual who's traveling should be able to say, or they should be able to answer the question, where am I? And then how do I get to where I want to go? And how do I get there safely and more independently? And we will talk about independence a little bit later. So orientation mobility is a lifelong process. It's important because safety creates a sense of confidence and a sense of well-being. O&M skills enable children to travel, or they enable children to safely explore and interact with the world, and the world that includes their home, their school, and their community. And when infants and children, including those with low vision or multiple disabilities, when they understand their bodies and their environments, they feel more safe. And when we think about safety and confidence, it's important to think about the difference between a student or a child or an adult who has the confidence to walk to their neighbor's house to play with their friend on their own versus a child who might not have that confidence, or a child who feels safe in their home or school environment versus a child who doesn't. So it's a really, really important topic and can open a lot of doors for children. And again, continuing on with why it's a lifelong process, think about when you learn letters in kindergarten, this leads to and builds to learning words, grammar, and writing. In orientation and mobility, learning body concepts and awareness leads and builds to using concepts to travel in near spaces and familiar places like home, but then also to new places such as around your school and to your community. So a few examples of things that O&M services support. So one, it might be the parents of an infant who might be dealing with their fear that their baby will hurt themselves as they move around the room. Or a young child who's learning to move towards their mother's voice. Another example with a young child that may have limited movement is to increase those movements to increase their quality of life. An O&M may support a student learning how to find their way in the community by using a monocular to read the street signs so they know where they're at. O&M support adolescents learning how to use a cane as well as the bus system so they can go and independently meet their friends. And O&M may support a child in a wheelchair who's learning how to find the bathroom independently. They also might support a student learning ways to travel independently to a future job in the community. So as you can tell by those examples, O&M it's so important. It's providing real life experiences that are essential to all children. These skills can help reduce isolation by giving students a common ground for interacting with not only their environment, but also their peers, family, friends, and also future employers. O&M instruction in many ways brings the general curriculum to life for children. Observation is what is essential. Children observe the world and their movement in the world through their sensory systems. What ultimately matters the most about this is not how much vision or hearing children have, but how they can feel and how they can interpret their own movement. Eyes may see, but the eyes do not think. Our brains are what do the thinking, and they help interpret sensory information and cognitively plan a response. And again, O&M is important because O&M helps support this by teaching that movement has purpose, and that purposeful movement may not always occur naturally for children with visual impairment because they're not able to always see what their parents are doing and then mimic it. Another thing that's important to mention is that an early O&M evaluation is really crucial. And I'm going to take a few moments here to share an example of an early O&M evaluation. And this is not to say that this example that I'm going to show you is the only evaluation that can be used for young children. This is just an example. All right, so this looks at the, oh, excuse me. There we go. So in this example here, it's going to look at concurrent motor skills, sensation, environmental concepts, body image, space and time relationships, which is really important, especially when you start thinking about crossing streets. It looks at gross motor skills. And then this assessment, it's going to look at these skills based on different ages. And so, like for 6 to 12 months, some of the concurrent motor skills they'll look at are like finger feeds, transferring objects, sitting without support. Sensation looks at an exposure to a variety of sounds and direct experiences. Some environmental concepts might be, does a child explore furniture or the appliances in their home? Do they go out in the yard and explore grass or mud or dirt? So just different things like that. And then I'm going to move down to, so like 12 to 24 months. Again, you're looking at those motor skills like walking steadily, runs, throws a ball, and things like that. So these are things that I think a lot of times we don't always think would be a part of O&M, but as you can tell, this is a really experience-based assessment here. And we'll come back to the PowerPoint. Alrighty. So has anyone here, why don't we just type in the chat, heard about the expanded core curriculum or the ECC for short? All right, I see 2 responses in the chat. No, yes, indeed. All right, well, we're going to talk about it a little bit. So in order to receive an appropriate education, it's generally understood that students who are blind and visually impaired must be provided appropriate instruction in a variety of subjects, including language arts, composition, science, and mathematics. But so for students who are blind and visually impaired, though, they might not be able to access those subjects. And so in order for them to access those subjects, as well as some different areas, the ECC covers those things. So the ECC is an additional set of skills, and there's actually 9 area of skills to be exact. Those skills include compensatory skills, orientation mobility, social interaction, independent living, recreation and leisure, sensory efficiency, assistive technology, career education, and self-determination. Now, some of these areas may seem really clear, like social interaction, those are your social skills. Independent living is a skill set in the area of the expanded core curriculum that's really big. It covers dressing, cooking, taking care of your home. It goes really, really wide. Recreation and leisure is really important. It's making sure, can you have fun? What are you doing to enjoy your life, and making sure that you have access to things that bring you joy and pleasure. Sensory efficiency is one that is using your other senses to access the environment. Compensatory skills, that skill set covers things like Braille, another way to access your education. Assistive technology is going to cover, of course, your assistive technology. So that might be where a child learns to use a Braille note to complete their school assignments. Or that might include instruction in using a computer that has screen magnification software on it. And then self-determination is really about, having those self-advocacy skills and being a strong representative for yourself to get what you need. Some more specific examples about the ECC would be like a student is reading at grade level, but they are struggling to maintain friendships. And some of these struggles with maintaining friendships, that could be because your child is not able to see facial expressions very well. And so they might miss out on jokes, or even if someone says something sarcastic and rolls their eyes, they might miss that. And so we address those things within the expanded core curriculum, or those needs rather. And so this student might want to join a book club at the local library to get to know some friends, like in a smaller setting. And the O&M specialist can help teach the route to the library. And then this also addresses recreation and leisure. Another example is a student eats in the lunchroom, but they need support to open up a few containers and to manage the cleanup. An O&M specialist could practice one-on-one with the student when the lunchroom isn't so crowded, so that the student can be more independent in the lunchroom with not only traveling in it, but also supporting those independent living skills. And that's also something your teacher of the blind and visually impaired can help assist you with as well. We have a couple documents here. So this first one is it's a general document that we have about the expanded core curriculum. And this PowerPoint is available to you all in the live binder, so you can go through and access these links this way. But this is a nice detailed document that thoroughly explains the expanded core curriculum and gives some really nice, solid examples. So if you have a child close to school age, or if you just want to learn more about it, please be sure to check this out. It's important to keep in mind that OSEP, which is short for the Office of Special Education, actually gives guidance on this topic all the way back in 2000. So the expanded core curriculum is recognized. The next thing I want to show you is a document titled, "What does the ECC look like for children birth to 3?" And so a nice example might be used for assistive technology, scribbling on a braille writer, doing some early literacy, having cause and effect toys, books that have like braille or maybe tactile pictures in them. For career education, there might be opportunities for them to play and grow, and then like learning some of those work-related skills, such as completing a task, following directions, following a routine or schedule, being, getting to bed on time. So those are just a few examples. Eating and dressing for independent living skills. For O&M, moving in space, knowing where your body is in space, and being able to navigate some of the familiar and unfamiliar environments. So please feel free to check out these documents.
Megan, we have a question.
Oh, yes.
How are those services given if the student does virtual school, especially those social skills?
That is a really good question. So I think that would depend on the plan that your child's IEP team has, and they would need to make those accommodations fit. But so what you're asking though is if the child is in virtual school and so I guess I'll need a little bit of follow-up. But is the student participating in virtual skill with peers or one-on-one? Okay, so that would be something to address with your IEP team to talk about if that's a concern, that they're not being taught. One of the things as a parent is, and we'll talk about this a little more in a couple slides, but you are a very important member of an IEP team, and you want to be sharing any disability related needs that you, or just in general, like concerns that you have for your child that are related to your child's disability. So that would be something to address with your IEP team. How can social skills be taught and be a part of the IEP? So your IEP team, they're going to sit down together and look at your child's assessments from their evaluation, look at their present levels, and make decisions based on the disability related needs that the student has on what goals the child needs to have and what services they need to have so they can access your education. So that's going to come back to the IEP. And it's important to share that while we are a part of the Department of Public Instruction, we are not members of IEP teams, and so we cannot say like what a goal should or shouldn't look like for a certain situation. But I would direct you back to your IEP team. And I also think this might be a really good, I think we can send out some contacts to like WSPE or even Wisconsin Facets as well, because those are two organizations that could also provide, I think, some guidance for support for the questions that you have. Does that help, Wendy?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
Okay. I feel bad because we can't, always, we can't always give those specific answers, but we can certainly, share some resources with you because those are really, really good questions. All right. Does anyone else have any other questions right now? Super. All right. So what is independence? So as an O&M, it's interesting because I can think back to when I was in college and we always hear independence, independence, independence. And I used to always think that independence meant doing something totally by yourself. But as I learned more about special education, is like independence is different for every single individual. And independence is not it's not, I feel like it's not a definitive term. There is a continuum of what that means for each individual. And so I want to, I guess what I want to say in this message is that what independence means for your child might mean something totally different for someone else's child. And we're not always looking for a child to be totally independent. And we all, as humans, we're all interdependent. But O&Ms, one of our main things we want to do is to find at least one small way to decrease dependence during travel time. And whether the functional level of the student or whatever the functional level of the student is, we always want to be thinking of at least like one more thing that the student can do, or one more thing that the student can do a little bit better to participate or to help in some small way to decrease total dependence during travel time. And I want to share, so Ken Tapp was an orientation and mobility consultant at the Wisconsin Center for the Blind for a long time. And he has created just some really fabulous resources and really just insightful papers and things. And I want to share a few of my favorite things. So he wrote I guess you could call it an article about some mobility objectives for mobility dependent children. And a couple of the points here is that to keep in mind that it may seem like sometimes that even going from your house to the car, it's just like, okay, we have to get there. Or when you're in the grocery store, or when you are going from the school drop off to the classroom, that it's just a transition time. We just need to get from A to B. But really, these times are really valuable times to use as an educational tool. And Ken talks about that even though getting there independently is not the objective, like use that as a travel tool. So like one example would be, I'm going to use the example from getting from the school drop off to the child's classroom. So maybe the goal is to maintain alertness while traveling from place to place. You also can use this travel time to practice communication skills. So again, staying in that example of going from the school drop off to the classroom, maybe we want to say hi to one or two people along the way and practice those social skills like, hello, good morning, how are you? And have some of that back and forth conversation, or even just a smile or a nod or a wave. Those are all methods of communication, or however your child responds to communicate in their way possible and how they're comfortable. You can also use travel time to practice choice making skills, like do we turn left or right? And that really, even if turning left and right is quicker, I think it's really powerful for students, especially those who are mobility dependent, or like who may be using a wheelchair or a walker. It really gives them more say in their independence and more power over, we're going this way because it's the way I want to go, and I know I can get there if we go this way, even if it's not the fastest way. I think that's really empowering to students. And then another thing about travel time is it exposes children to a variety of different environments, which is super important, as we saw back in that O&M assessment, that being exposed to a lot of different environments is really important. And then just finally, I want to come back to that original message of finding a way to decrease dependence during travel time and really thinking about what's that one more thing that your student can do or one more thing that they could do just a little bit better during this travel time. All right, and we'll switch back. All right. So at the beginning of the presentation, you heard me say that O&M is a lifelong learning process. This slide here is really important because it refers to state departments that can help support your child. I do want to add before I go through these that there are other agencies that can support your children, like Vision Forward, that's based in Milwaukee. The Wisconsin Council for the Blind and Visually Impaired is based in Madison, and they do a lot of adult services, but like they have a store, you can order canes from there. So that's just another organization that can help support your child. And Vision Forward does a ton of just really cool like programs and things. They're a really collaborative organization. And so they're really wonderful. So we're lucky that we have some of these great things. So the first organization that I want to touch on is the Department of Health Services, also known as DHS. They implement birth to 3 programs for children under the age of 3 who have delays or disabilities, including blindness and visual impairment. DHS contracts with each of the 72 counties in Wisconsin to provide the birth to 3 program for its residents. Then we have the Department of Public Instruction, also known as the DPI, and they oversee special education for students ages 3 to 21. And then I also want to touch on the Department of Health and Services again, because they have the Office for the Blind and Visually Impaired, and they work with adults. So those are 3 important agencies to keep in the back of your mind if you need support or have questions. The DPI also has a program website, and actually this is a good time to share that website. And thank you for everyone's patience as I've been flipping through. So the DPI maintains a program website for all disability category areas. And this is the Blind and Visually Impaired website. And so what's cool about this website is there's the state definition of blind and visually impaired, which is blind and visually impaired means even after correction, a child's visual functioning adversely affects educational performance. And then it goes on to say how an IEP team may identify a child as blind and visually impaired. And so what needs to happen there is your TVI needs to be licensed under PI 34. They need to complete a functional vision evaluation that includes a review of medical information from an ophthalmologist or optometrist. They need to do formal and informal tests of visual functioning. They need to look at the implications of their child's blindness or visual impairment in the educational and curricular environment of the child. And then an orientation and mobility specialist also has to be licensed under PI 34.089. And those licensed under in the PI 34, that's the Wisconsin Administrative Code. And an O&M needs to evaluate the child to determine if there are related orientation and mobility needs. Now, if your child does not need O&M, they still can be eligible as a child who is blind and visually impaired and receive special education services. So if your child does not have those disability related needs, don't think that your child won't be able to get services. And then there's just we talk a little bit about incidence and disproportionality. Low vision and blindness and visual impairment is a really low incidence disability, less than 0.4%. So 1% of all students that have IEPs are blind and visually impaired as their primary disability. So that's just an interesting fact. And then I think the most important part of this page, now that we've kind of gone through the technical terms, is this family support and professional organizations for student needs. This page here, we update this as we learn about different organizations, but this just features again, a ton of organizations or places with information that can support your child. Like we have okay, so like the National Blindness Professional Certification Board. Earlier, you might have heard me say NOMC. This is the organization that that certifies folks that have the NOMC, and they are connected with the National Federation of the Blind in Wisconsin, and they do some really cool family events. Debbie Meng, I want to give you a shout out because I received some of those emails, and they just do cool things for families. So look out for that. And then Vision Forward is here, as we mentioned. So there's just different Wisconsin pediatric eye care professionals is listed here. And then if you do have some harder questions with your that you're facing with your IEP team, I encourage you to check out additional family support and advocacy organizations because they can help support you with those needs, which is really important. So, and we will make sure that these links are updated into the PowerPoint as well if they aren't already. And does anyone have any questions so far?
I'm not seeing any yet.
Okay, super. Okay, so first we want to give a shout out to our B3 attendees who might be working with an O&M, and of course, families. So is anyone here currently working with an O&M or has worked with an O&M in the past? And why don't we type in the chat, or you can just shout it out too. I'm seeing some, okay, Wendy's working with an O&M, Roberta is, cool. Very, very cool. So your Birth to 3 program is going to provide a team of professionals to serve not only the child, but the family as well. The family participation is a really important part of Birth to 3 services. And your program is going to contract with various sources to provide some of these services that an individual child needs. Sometimes CSAs and different agencies will contract with the DHS county where they're located to provide the services. And then some school districts, like their professionals, might contract on their own as well. So anyways, all right, so what do we need to know here? So the Wisconsin Birth to 3 program, they might serve your child. And important from like more information, we'll go to the family page. And then if you have specific questions about a Birth to 3 program, please contact your county Birth to 3 program. So the first thing you want to do is open up a map to show the different regions. Whoops. Oh, hi, Monica. Every day on the job, Linika, I get to learn about orientation and mobility services from WCBVI. Yeah, we have some great O&Ms here. All right, and thank you for being so patient as I move through all of my screens. So this map that we have here is this regional map of services. And it also, there's a key, and the different regions have a different contact person. So you can find your county and you can find the person who's going to connect you with information about Birth to 3. And then we'll take a look here at the Birth to 3 program website. And so on the right here, there's information for families, who is eligible, costs, different information for counties. And then if you're here as a provider, there's information for you as well here. So this is just a good website if you have a child under 3 to be familiar with and you want to seek services. And I also want to mention too that Birth to 3 is a part of IDEA, and that is a part of Part C. And I'm going to pop that in the chat. All right. Okay. All right. So some of you who might have children who are under the age of 3, you might be anxiously thinking, okay, I've been getting birth to 3 services, but what happens when my child goes to school? And it's a big question. It's a big transition. So essentially, in a nutshell, each school district in Wisconsin, they are responsible for providing a continuum of special education and related services to children with disabilities and who need special education. This includes children with disabilities in early childhood programs. Children are evaluated to determine if they meet one or more of the state's eligibility criteria, just like we went over in the previous a couple slides ago. And a comprehensive evaluation considers all disability area needs. So that means that your IEP team is not just focusing on one area, and the focus is more on what does my child need instead of thinking, okay, my child has a visual impairment, so their needs must just be they need Braille and they need O&M. We want to be looking at the whole child and all disability related needs. So, and our language is going to change a little bit too. So do you remember the term IFSP team when in birth to 3? So now your child, now that they're in school, your team is called the IEP team, and that stands for Individualized Education Program. And it's important to know that so local education agencies, which are also known as LEAs, and that's also like another term for your school district, they are responsible for identifying, locating, and evaluating children with disabilities, including those who are blind and visually impaired. So that's a responsibility of theirs. And as I was saying earlier in the presentation, you are a super important member of the IEP team as well as your child. And did you know that, as we talked about before, at every initial evaluation, and so this would be the first evaluation that your child has to see if they are eligible for special education services, an O&M assessment is done. It is required that that assessment is done by an O&M specialist. So those needs are looked at. And then if there are concerns later on during the reevaluation process, you always want to share those concerns or what those needs, so we make sure that they are addressed. And it's important to know too that anyone can refer your child if you think, like say, for example, you did not utilize birth to 3 services, or you learned your child has a visual impairment when they turned 4. Anyone, including you, can refer your child to have a special education evaluation. So, like I said, at every initial evaluation, an O&M assessment is done by an O&M specialist. We want the children to be moving along with their peers, and we want to teach them skills and strategies that are going to help them fully access, engage, and make progress in all aspects of their education. If your child doesn't receive O&M services after the IEP team reviews the evaluation, this can be revisited at any time, but they must be addressed at the 3-year reeval when the whole team reviews the IEP. It doesn't mean to do another O&M assessment, but you want to look at the need. It means to consider, are there O&M needs, and do we need more information, which could be an O&M assessment, or does your team have enough data? And I also want to add too that sometimes like your child might not have a need right away, but then depending on a variety of different factors, they may have a need later on. So that's why it's really important to, just because your child might not need O&M, they might need it in the future. And then they might for a couple of years need O&M, and then they might not need the instruction for a little bit, but that doesn't mean that they might not need it later on. So that's why it's really important to always ask that question: do we need to look at O&M needs? So some of the questions that you might ask about mobile orientation and mobility related needs, or any concerns that you might have to share at every IEP meeting, you're going to put those in. There's a place called or an area for parents' strengths and concerns. And so like some of the things that you might put in that section are: has the vision changed? Has the school changed? Have any adults noticed a change in mobility, such as like Maybe your child is like hesitating as they walk places, or when they're negotiating a curb. Maybe they're not joining in as much when they're playing. How's PE going? Like, are they participating as much as they usually do? What about time on the playground? Like, are they running and diving in and playing? Are they a little hesitant and a little nervous about joining in with their peers? Think about field trips. How are those going? Think about your co-curriculars like band. Maybe they act in school plays and they're really nervous about negotiating stairs going up to the stage, or when they're on the stage, they're nervous because they can't find the drop off from the edge of the stage. Really, you're looking at that question. Is your student doing what his or her peers are doing? If your child is provided with a cane or another mobility device, these are provided by an O&M, and the training to use those devices happen with an O&M. So now let's take a look at the form that your IEP team is going to use to determine if your child is eligible for special education under the blind and visually impaired disability category. And we've gone over this essentially, so this will sound familiar. So a few slides back, when I was showing you the DPI website for the program page for blind and visually impaired, we talked about some of the disability category criteria. So this form here is really a discussion tool to make sure that the IEP team has gone over all of the components for a disability category, and to make sure that we didn't miss anything, and that and it's an opportunity to share the data and then talk about that data as well and figure out, okay, what does this mean? So it's our disability category of blind and visually impaired is split into 3 sections. Section 1 is the functional vision evaluation. And all of the boxes must be checked yes here for a student to be considered blind and visually impaired. So the first prompt, it's super simple. Did a TVI conduct a functional vision evaluation? Yes or no? But to check yes, that evaluation needs to include all of the following components that we discussed earlier: that review of medical information from an ophthalmologist or optometrist. Did formal or informal tests happening? Was there a determination of the educational implications or curricular needs? Does the student's visual functioning adversely affect their educational performance? All of these prompts, except the first one, need to be explained or reference data or other evidence. Like, you can't just say yes, but not have an explanation for why. There need to be different examples of those. So like just a simple example from the review of medical information, you might just say, child has retinitis pigmentosa, just as simple as that. The next section is orientation and mobility needs. And the first question is, did an O&M specialist evaluate the student to determine if there are needs in the home, school, or community environments? Yes or no? Then the next prompt, this addresses, does the child have O&M needs? Yes or no? And then in that section, you would reference, or the O&M would reference and explain their data as to why they do or do not have O&M needs. And this needs to be in parent-friendly language. So if you don't understand something in a report or what's in this section, please ask your O&M to just explain it a little bit better. As education and as teachers and professionals, like, we know that as parents, you all have, especially going through the IEP process, you have to know about so many different things. So please always ask, because we will be happy to share and explain further with you. Like, that is just probably one of the most important parts of our job. So please ask if you don't understand something. Then finally, doesn't have O&M needs, they can still meet the criteria. All right. Oh, I'm getting an okay. So there's 2 sections. There's initial evaluation, and then there's a reevaluation. That initial evaluation is your child's first evaluation for special education in like a school age system, or perhaps your child, you didn't learn that your child had a visual impairment until they were 7. That would be your initial evaluation. As a team, you decide, and remember, you are part of the team. You decide yes or no. The documentation of the criteria above demonstrates that even after correction, a student's visual functioning adversely affects educational performance. The student meets the disability category criteria under blind and visually impaired. So you as a team, you're going to talk about all the information above and decide, is there an adverse effect?
Megan, we have a question in the chat.
Oh, sure.
Sorry, I was trying to get a good spot to chime in.
Oh, no, just interrupt me.
This is a new form, correct? Question mark. And
right.
What is the major difference between this form and the form used in the past?
Oh, okay. Oh, man. So the form in the past, the biggest change, actually, I have a document for this, but just to briefly explain, there used to be a checklist that was located on this, and this used to be a worksheet and not a form. And so a form is required, a worksheet is not. So it used to be a worksheet, so not required. And this actually is not required until next year. But there used to be a checklist that listed different visual impairments or different acuities, or there was a spot for other permanent and irremediable conditions. So now that checklist has been removed, the section 1, this is the same. Then another change was that it used to say for the orientation and mobility assessment, it used to be that a teacher of the blind and visually impaired in conjunction with an O&M specialist could perform the evaluation. And that created a lot of confusion. And it's really important that O&Ms complete O&M evaluations because it's in their scope of practice. And it's not in a TVI scope of practice. And then section 3 is also new, and the reevaluation that has changed too. And basically what has changed with reevaluation is before, when you would have you would do your reevaluation every 3 years, or when the team felt like a reevaluation needed to happen, and you had to meet all the criteria to be considered eligible. But now when there's a reevaluation, your child does not need to meet that criteria anymore. If they've met it once already, they just need to demonstrate a need for a specially designed instruction and still demonstrate that need, that there's an adverse effect on their education. But again, you need to have data or evidence to back that up, which is often in the form of a functional vision assessment or an O&M assessment. So you still need to have, while you don't need to go through all of those check boxes, you still need to have data and evidence to support those needs. Can a TV?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I just saw it. No, Melissa.
You saw the question?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
They cannot.
The question was, can a TVI do O&M services if our district does not have a specific O&M specialist?
And we have a document actually with like the side-by-side changes from where the rule changed. And we will make sure that we share that as well, Wendy, because that's a really good question. Any other questions? These are such good questions. Because this is heavy. So please feel free to contact us if after the presentation you're like, oh man, I still have questions. All righty. Okay, I don't see any in the chat.
Can I interrupt? I just want to say this is really, really, really good information.
Oh, good.
I can't write it down fast enough.
Oh, you don't know. Just ask us, and we'll point you, because that's faster. Just soak it in.
Yes. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All righty. Oh, you would think that after all these years of Zooming, I feel like I still get those rookie errors of being on mute or having the wrong thing shared. So, okay, All righty. So now we're sharing a couple more important ways that your child's supported in Wisconsin. So Babies Count is a registry, and this is managed by Vision Forward, that organization that I mentioned earlier. It is not managed by DPI, and it is not managed by DHS. Colleen Kickbush is the coordinator. She's super nice, super wonderful, helpful. If you have any questions about this, please contact her. Her email is listed and she will help you. And then we have the Wisconsin Deafblind Technical Assistance Project, which is also known as WDB TAP. This is a grant funded program, and they are managed by DPI through WESP DHH, which is our sister program, which is the they have the School for the Deaf, and then they also have a outreach program as well, and we collaborate with them all the time. And they have different resources available to students age 0 to 21 who have suspected vision and hearing loss, and they also do a lot of cool things. Jolene Gruber is their grant coordinator, and she also is fantastic and very helpful, very knowledgeable, and she can support you as well. We've also linked the WDB TAP request for services. So if your child is deafblind, or if they do have a suspected vision or hearing loss, you can go ahead to that link and request support. Okay, so now let's go to like some more fun things that we've gotten through all of the really technical pieces. So let's talk about what you're doing. As some of you may know, you are your child's first teacher, and what you're already doing with your child is so important. I'm going to share some of my favorite parts of this document that's linked, that's called A Child's Work is Play, that describes a few different ways to play with your child. First, I want to go over a couple definitions of play. So there's parallel play, which that might be I'm nearby, I'm playing too. And so like an example of that might be maybe I'm standing on the stool in the sink and we're doing dishes, but we're really like playing in the bubbles. And you know, when there's two sides of the sinks and we're doing the same thing. Then there's also but you're nearby doing something too. Mirroring, which is kind of similar. I'm joining into what you're doing. So that might be, oh, you're cooking. Oh, actually, I don't like that example I gave for the last one, but mirroring would be like the doing dishes. Like I'm washing dishes. Now I'm going to join you washing dishes and do what you're doing. Then there's interrupting. I'm trying to do what you're doing and I'm stopping our play. Do you want to start again, or are you done playing? Then there's expanding. I'm trying what you're doing and adding this. Like, so then you might be joining them in play, but maybe if you're, say you're cooking in the play kitchen and they're stirring a pot, but maybe then you want to add wiping down the play kitchen. You're adding another task to the play. And then there's turn taking. You go first. Now try this. Then I'll go and I'll try this. I want to share some examples, more detailed examples of mirroring. So you can join your child's movement in place. Like your child might be making little movements with their hand or their toe or their head, and you can let them know that you're there by mirroring them or just lightly touching the part that's moving. Your child also might be making big movements like jumping or rocking, and let them know that you are there by joining them in their big moves. You can also join in your child's movement with a prop. Anything can be a toy to shake or roll or toss. You can also join your child's movement through space. Are they rolling, cruising furniture, crawling, running? You can follow and do those moves too. So I just wanted to add, so I just want to share 4 examples of rooms in your house and some things that you can do to play that are paired with like movement concepts and ideas, but they're playful. So like a bedroom, you could get your wiggles out, you could wrap up in a blanket, you could settle down, you could rock, sway, lay down, bounce, practice under, over with a blanket or pillow. Bathroom, you can pour, splash, pick up, put in, get out, squeeze, smooth, roll. In your kitchen, you could push, put in, take out, fill, empty, scrub, rub, shake, bang, stack, knock over. And then in your garage, you could push, pull, jump, roll, stack, knock over, spill, and balance. I wanted to end that on just sharing that WCBVI Outreach, as I said earlier, is a resource for you, not only you, but your birth to 3 providers, your LEA, and your IEP team, and future school age providers. For example, I just received a request from a special education teacher who had some questions about the expanded core curriculum. So I'm going to connect with that individual and share some resources and just answer their questions. So we really are a resource for anyone on the team, not just the family, not just the student, and not just your TVI and O&M. All right. So the final thing, we just wanted to share a couple more resources available to you. And we want to end on this note because today we've shared a ton of information, and if like for me, I can keep about 3 things in my brain, and then the rest I always go back to my resources. So if you're like, oh, I have a question, or I wonder about this or that, an outreach service request is a simple way that you can get in touch with us. You can hit the contact outreach button, or you can go to our outreach service request. And that is a Google form that you can pop in your information, and someone will get back to you. And there's a ton of different services that you can request. Of course, right at the top is birth to 3. We have consultation for ages 3 to 6. We'll hook you up with Trisha. There's school age consultation, so I might support with that, or orientation mobility consultation. I might help support with that as well. We have transition consultations, assistive technology consultations. We have virtual mini low vision clinics. Student programming is me with the short courses. We have 2 parent liaisons going all the way from 0 to 21. We have general family resources. We provide virtual event support based on our staffing availability. We help with professional development around the state. We provide, so I help with expanded core curriculum lesson planning and just different support. We have Braille resources or other. One thing I want to mention is that we not only do we have a consultative model, but we also have a collaborative model. So if you put in a request for a service, we are going to connect also with your TVI, your O&M, and as well as your special education director, because we want to make sure that everyone is on the same page and knows what services are happening or are occurring. And I also want to point out too, this is, I think, sort of cool, but we are a part of the Wisconsin State Legislature. So if you want to learn more about the purpose of WCBVI, you can check out, oh, this isn't loading here. But you can learn more. Oh, here we go. You can learn more about the legislated purpose of WCBVI, which is really neat. So we're actually written into the administrative code. So if you ever want to dig into that, you can look and see what we are here to do. So it's pretty exciting because it's a long list. So it's awesome to be a part of that.
We have a question in the chat.
Okay.
So we have a question that says, we used to have an O&M specialist, but he retired last year. His position was not replaced. How do we get an O&M specialist to work with their son again?
So we have some resources that we share with you can get involved, like on the bigger picture there is the Superintendent's Advisory Council on Blindness and Visual Impairment. They are always seeking parent members, which I think are probably our most important members, because they're advocating, they're here like sharing from their child's experience. But staffing is a real challenge for O&M specialists. There is a shortage nationally. And so we can provide some ideas about recruitment for local education agencies and on where they might look for another O&M specialist, but it is it's a challenge sometimes because there's just not there are shortages throughout the state. and so if you want to connect with us later, I think we would be happy to chat with your LEA and just share a few ideas if they're looking for some support on recruiting in O&M and like some places that they can look or post a vacancy as well. Okay. You're welcome,
Melissa said
Melissa.
thank you. Okay.
You're welcome. And again, I feel because it's not the most helpful answer, but it's certainly finding O&M specialists is certainly challenging. Okay, so some other ways that you can get involved, like I just said, the Advisory Council for Blind and Visual Impairment Education. And there's also a council for birth to 3. And then we just wanted to finally just share a couple resources about the O&M scope of practice. This document here comes from our professional organization, which is the Association for the Education and Rehabilitation of the Blind and Visually Impaired. And that covers, this is a pretty recent document. It's just a few years old. And it goes through the scope of practice of what an O&M specialist does. And for you as a parent, like that's important to know, what an O&M does and, what they don't do as well. And so it's a little long, but it's informative. And it's also helpful too, I think, for, because some school districts, because as we talked about earlier, a blindness and visual impairment in Wisconsin, it's less than 1%. So it's very possible that a district may not have a child who's blind and visually impaired for years. So this is a nice resource to share with them as well, to talk about like what an O&M does. And then there's another document titled, What Does an O&M Do? And this one is much shorter. And so is another good one to share. But the scope of practice is a lot more detailed. So, and that's all I have for you this morning. Are there any final questions?
I'm not seeing anything come up in the chat, but please.
Okay.
So I have a question. If you get O&M services through school, can you also get outside O&M services to work with the families at home?
So the home environment are to address O&M needs that you have in your home.
Right. Or, like when we're out doing activities.
Right. So O&M addresses homeschool and community. When I have worked as an O&M, I frequently worked with children in their homes and out in the community. And so, but if you wanted additional services, I have also had families who wanted things that were just outside of their IEP, and they I have worked directly with them as well. And so it's possible, but the IEP team they are the ones who determine where those services happen. So again, that would be an IEP team decision.
Okay. So that's something that I should have brought up at his IEP meeting about outside or O&M services outside of school.
Yeah. You would talk about just in general, like where those services happen and what they look like. Roberta, our O&M shared. Oh, yes. Okay. Roberta said our O&M shared this website that has activity calendars that can be done at home, especially if there's no O&M in your area, parentmobility.com. Oh, that's cool. Roberta, I've never seen that before.
Yeah, cool. They're really cool. Like there's a calendar for every month. And it just gives each week, one activity you can do per day. And they're really, really cool. So I hope that website works.
Greta can climb stairs. Yeah, I just did.
Very cool. It does. I just clicked the link and it was dark. Thank you for sharing that. Anything else? Okay, well, if you again, if you think of any other questions, please share. I loved all of the questions that you all asked this morning. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend and a great end of the school year for those of you who have children in school.